I never told anyone what I noticed that November morning at St. Matthew's, the flicker on the screen, the way Daniel moved before anyone else understood, the hollow sound when someone yanked the projector cord from the wall. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, the entire sanctuary held its breath. The image was unmistakable. Private. Intimate. Mara didn't turn around. She sat perfectly still 2 rows ahead, her shoulders squared, her hands folded in her lap like she was holding something breakable. Daniel was already on his feet, his palm flat against the projector lens, his voice steady and cold. "Turn it off." Now, the plug came free. The screen went white. And in that sudden, terrible silence, I understood what I had been cataloging for weeks: the wrong hymn numbers, the overnight emails, the blue painter's tape on a USB stick that appeared without explanation. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. And it hadn't started today. By the time I walked out into the gray November light, the parking lot already felt like a crime scene. People stood in small clusters, not speaking, just watching each other watch. The air smelled like wet leaves and exhaust. Someone's car alarm was going off 3 rows over, a rhythmic beeping that nobody seemed interested in stopping. Daniel had his arm around Mara's waist, guiding her toward their car, a blue Honda Accord with a dented rear bumper and a "Coexist" sticker that was peeling at the edges. She moved like someone crossing ice, each step deliberate and careful, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere past the parking lot fence. I didn't follow them. I stood beside my own car, a 10-year-old Camry with 143,000 miles on it, and watched them drive away. The Honda's brake lights flared red at the parking lot exit, then disappeared around the corner onto Wernal Road. The beeping car alarm finally stopped. The clusters of people began to dissolve, climbing into their vehicles with lowered heads and tight mouths. Ruth Calder, the church secretary, stood near the main entrance with her arms crossed over her chest. She was 53, with steel gray hair cut in a practical bob and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. She wore the same thing every Sunday, a navy blazer over a white blouse, black slacks, and sensible flats that made no sound on the tile floors. When she saw me looking, she gave a small, tight nod, then turned and went back inside. I got into my car, set my purse on the passenger seat, and sat with my hands on the steering wheel for a full minute before starting the engine. Through the windshield, I could see the corner of the church building, red brick, white trim, a small cross mounted above the double doors. It had been built in 1957, and it looked like it. The gutters needed cleaning. The landscaping needed updating. The sign out front, the one with the movable letters that announced service times and inspirational quotes, was missing the letter E in "Everyone Welcome." I started the car and drove home. My house was 4 miles away, in an older neighborhood where the trees met over the streets and the sidewalks buckled from decades of root pressure. I'd lived there for 22 years, since 6 months after my husband died, and I realized I couldn't stay in the house we'd raised Daniel in. This house was smaller. 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom. A kitchen with laminate countertops and appliances that were harvest gold when I moved in and were still harvest gold now. The carpet was worn in the hallway. The wallpaper in the dining room had a pattern of tiny roses that I'd stopped noticing after the first year. I parked in the driveway, walked up the front steps, and unlocked the door. Inside, the house was quiet and cool. I set my purse on the table by the door, hung my coat on the rack, and walked straight to the kitchen. The notebook was in the drawer beside the stove, a plain composition book with a black and white marbled cover, the kind you could buy at any drugstore for $1. I'd started keeping it 3 years ago, after a billing error at the dentist's office had taken me 6 months to resolve, because I hadn't written down the dates or the names of the people I'd spoken with. Since then, I've filled 2.5 notebooks with small, ordinary details: when the water heater made a strange noise, when the neighbor's tree dropped a branch on my fence, when the pharmacy shorted me 3 pills on a prescription refill. I opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top, November 6, 2024. Underneath that, I wrote, St. Matthew's. Video on screen during announcements. Daniel covered the projector. Mara did not turn around. AV volunteer, front aisle. I set the pen down and stared at the page for a long time. Then I picked it up again and added one more line. How long has this been happening? Because the truth was, I'd been noticing small things for weeks. Things that didn't fit. Things that made my receptionist instincts flare, the instincts I developed over 34 years of sitting at front desks, answering phones, sorting mail, and knowing when someone was lying about why they needed to see the boss without an appointment. And now, sitting alone in my kitchen with the November rain starting to tap against the window, I realized I'd been collecting pieces of a pattern I didn't want to see. I made tea. Earl Grey, with 1 sugar and a splash of milk. I carried the mug to the table and sat down with the notebook open in front of me. Outside, the rain picked up, drumming steadily on the roof. A car drove past, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. I flipped back through the notebook, looking for anything I might have written about the church. 3 pages back, I found it. October 23. Hymn numbers wrong. Heat not working. Mara holding bulletin against chest. Someone changed the pageant link spam site. Brent, it was a glitch. I read it twice, then turned to a fresh page and began reconstructing everything I could remember from the past 3 weeks. The first crack appeared 3 Sundays earlier, in late October. Evelyn Park had always been the kind of woman who arrived early and sat in the same place, 4th pew from the front, left aisle, end seat. She liked the angle. She could see the pulpit, the choir loft, and the side door where the ushers rotated. Her son, Daniel, was one of those ushers, and on the Sundays when he served, she watched him move through the sanctuary with the same calm efficiency he brought to his warehouse supervisor job. Steady. Reliable. Unremarkable in the best way. Daniel Park was 42 years old, with dark hair that was starting to go gray at the temples and a solid build that came from years of lifting boxes and walking warehouse floors. He'd worked at the same distribution center for 16 years, managing a team of 8 and handling inventory for a regional grocery chain. He wore khakis and polo shirts to church, never suits. His shoes were always clean but never expensive. He smiled at people when he handed them bulletins, asked how their week had been, and remembered the names of regulars and visitors alike. His wife, Mara, was 2 years younger, a 6th-grade English teacher at Eastwood Middle School. A sprawling brick building on the east side of Kansas City where half the students qualified for free lunch and the other half brought lunch from home in insulated bags with their names written in Sharpie. She'd taught there for 14 years. She had a reputation for being firm but fair, for assigning difficult books and then helping struggling readers get through them, for decorating her classroom with posters of authors and quotations about the power of words. Mara Park was compact and precise. She wore her dark hair in a low ponytail most days, kept her nails short and unpainted, and favored cardigans and trousers in neutral colors. She smiled easily but laughed rarely. She graded papers at the dining room table every night, using a red pen and a rubric she'd refined over a decade. She drank herbal tea, walked 3 miles every morning before school, and listened to podcasts about teaching strategies and true crime. That October morning, the 23rd, the heat wasn't working yet at St. Matthew's. The sanctuary smelled like wet coats and lemon furniture oil, and Evelyn kept her jacket buttoned all the way to her collar. The temperature inside couldn't have been more than 58 degrees. People kept their coats on. The choir sang the opening hymn with visible breath. The hymn numbers on the screen were wrong. They'd listed "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God" as hymn 312 when it was actually 551. Evelyn noticed because she had the hymnal open in her lap, and when she turned to 312, she found "Come, Ye Thankful People, Come," which was a Thanksgiving hymn they wouldn't sing until next month. She looked up at the screen, then down at the hymnal, then back at the screen. Around her, people fumbled with their hymnals, trying to find the right page. Someone behind her muttered, 551. It's 551. The organist, a woman named Beatrice Chin who'd been playing for St. Matthew's since 1993, launched into "A Mighty Fortress" anyway, and the congregation stumbled along, half of them looking at the wrong page, half of them singing from memory. During the announcements, the order got scrambled. The mission update came before the greeting, and the prayer requests disappeared entirely from the slide deck. Pastor Elaine Kerr, a 58-year-old woman with short gray hair and a calm, measured speaking style, paused mid-sentence when she realized the prayer list wasn't on the screen. She improvised, reading from a printed list she'd brought to the pulpit, but Evelyn could see the brief flicker of confusion cross her face. Small things. Easy to overlook. The kind of mistakes that happen when volunteers are managing complicated technology on limited sleep and not enough training. But Evelyn didn't overlook them. After the service, she stood in the hallway near the fellowship hall, waiting for Daniel to finish his usher duties. The fellowship hall was buzzing with the usual post-service activity, coffee brewing in the big steel urn, people standing in clumps with styrofoam cups and paper plates loaded with store-bought cookies, children running in circles around the tables while their parents pretended not to notice. Evelyn didn't go in. She stood in the doorway and watched. Mara was near the back wall, standing alone with a folded bulletin pressed flat against her chest like a shield. She wasn't talking to anyone. She wasn't drinking coffee. She was just standing there, her eyes fixed on the bulletin board across the room where someone had pinned construction paper turkeys made by the Sunday school kids. Evelyn walked over and stood beside her daughter-in-law without saying anything. After a moment, Mara spoke quietly, without looking over. Someone changed the Christmas pageant link. Evelyn turned slightly. Change it how? The QR code in the bulletin. It's supposed to go to the sign-up form. Instead, it goes to a spam site. 3 parents clicked it before someone noticed. Evelyn took the bulletin from Mara's hands, gently, the way you might take something fragile from a child, and unfolded it. There, in the lower right corner of the back page, was a QR code printed in black ink, with a URL beneath it in 8-point font. Evelyn pulled out her phone, opened the Notes app, and typed the address exactly as it appeared, letter for letter, number for number. Did Daniel report it? He mentioned it to Brent. Brent said it was a glitch. Brent Lyle. Evelyn knew him the way you know people in a congregation you've attended for years, by face, by role, by reputation, but not deeply. He was 48, maybe 49. He owned a small IT consulting business that served medical offices and law firms around the city. He'd been volunteering as the AV coordinator at St. Matthew's for 6 years, ever since the previous coordinator, a retired engineer named Harold Voss, had moved to Arizona to be near his daughter. Brent was efficient. He showed up early on Sundays, unlocked the AV closet, set up the soundboard and the projector, and ran the service with minimal fuss. He wore khakis and button-down shirts, always tucked in. He kept his graying hair cut short and his beard trimmed close. He drove a silver Subaru Outback with a bike rack and a bumper sticker that said, "I'd rather be sailing." He was also, Evelyn had noticed, the kind of man who liked control more than responsibility. He was efficient when things went smoothly, but defensive when they didn't. If someone questioned his setup or suggested a different approach, he'd smile tightly and say something like, "I've been doing this for 6 years," or, "Trust me, this is the best way." Evelyn saved the note on her phone and slipped it back into her coat pocket. Write down who clicked the link. Mara looked at her for the first time. Why? Because if it's a glitch, it won't happen again. Mara held Evelyn's gaze for a long moment, then nodded. She didn't ask any more questions. She just turned and walked toward the coffee urn, her footsteps silent on the worn carpet. Evelyn stood alone in the doorway, watching the room, cataloging details. She saw Ruth Calder near the coffee table, talking to a woman Evelyn didn't recognize. She saw Brent across the room, standing near the AV cart with his arms crossed, talking to one of the ushers, a young man named Tyler, who worked at a call center and always looked exhausted. She saw Daniel near the doors, shaking hands with departing congregants, smiling his steady, untroubled smile. And she saw Pastor Elaine moving through the crowd, stopping at each cluster of people, touching shoulders, asking questions, and listening with her whole body turned toward whoever was speaking. Evelyn turned and walked back to her car. That evening, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with a blank sheet of notebook paper and a ballpoint pen. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray and low. The streetlights came on at 5:43, casting yellow circles on the wet pavement outside her window. She wrote the date at the top of the page, October 23, 2024. Underneath that, she wrote 3 things. Hymn numbers incorrect. Screen showed 312. Should have been 551. Announcements out of order. Missions before greeting. Prayer requests missing. Christmas pageant link changed to spam site. 3 parents clicked. Brent called it a glitch. Then she added a 4th line. Who has access to the AV system? She drew a line underneath that and started a list. Brent Lyle, coordinator. Pastor Elaine, has key to AV closet. Ruth Calder, may have key unclear. She tapped the pen against the paper, thinking. Then she added, who has login access to the presentation software? She didn't know the answer to that, but she intended to find out. Evelyn folded the paper in half, slipped it into the manila envelope she kept in the drawer labeled Church, Miscellaneous, and filed it away. She didn't know yet what she was building, but she knew she was building something. 2 nights later, on October 25th, Mara's phone buzzed at 2:11 in the morning. The sound cut through the dark bedroom like a saw. Daniel woke first. He was a light sleeper, always had been, even as a child. His mother used to joke that he'd wake up if a moth landed on the windowsill. He heard the vibration against the nightstand and reached over, squinting at the screen without his glasses. Unknown number. He shook Mara gently. Someone's texting you. Mara sat up slowly, disoriented. She fumbled for her glasses on the nightstand, put them on, and took the phone from Daniel's hand. The screen was too bright in the dark room. She squinted at it, read the message once, then read it again aloud in a flat, bewildered voice. Did you approve the upload? The message was from a number with a 913 area code, Kansas City. No name, no context, just those 5 words. Daniel took the phone and stared at the message. Who's this from? I don't know. What upload? I don't know. He tried calling the number back. It rang 4 times, slow, hollow rings that sounded distant and mechanical, and went to a generic voicemail prompt. A robotic female voice. The person you are trying to reach is not available. Please leave a message after the tone. Daniel hung up without leaving a message. He handed the phone back to Mara and sat up fully, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His feet found his slippers in the dark. He was wearing the same gray t-shirt and flannel pajama pants he'd worn to bed. His hair stuck up on one side. Block the number, he said. What if it's important? At 2 in the morning? Block it. Mara opened the phone settings and blocked the number. Then she opened her email app, scrolling through the messages that had come in overnight. Spam. A school newsletter. A promotional email from a bookstore. And then, at the top of the list, a message with a red flag. Security alert. New sign-in detected. The email was from her personal Gmail account. It was timestamped 1:58 am, 13 minutes before the text message. Mara opened it and read it aloud. New sign-in from Windows device. Location: North Kansas City, Missouri. IP address: 72.198.54.12. If this wasn't you, secure your account immediately. The email included a small map with a red pin dropped on a residential neighborhood about 8 miles north of their house. Mara zoomed in on the map. The pin was in an area she didn't recognize, a grid of streets with names like Maple and Oak and Birch, lined with small single-family homes built in the 1950s and 60s. Daniel leaned over her shoulder and stared at the screen. Someone got into your email. They tried. I don't know if they got in. Change the password. Right now. Mara did. She navigated to her account settings, clicked security, and generated a new password, 16 characters, random, a mix of letters, numbers, and symbols. She saved it in her password manager, logged out of all devices, and enabled 2-factor authentication. When she was done, she looked over at Daniel, who was sitting on the edge of the bed with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded in front of his face. This is weird, she said. Yeah. Do you think it's related to the pageant link? I don't know. Maybe. Should we report it? To who? Mara didn't have an answer. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the house settle around them, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the faint ticking of the radiator, the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Call my mom in the morning. Show her the messages." "Why your mom?" "Because she keeps track of things. And because if something's wrong, she'll know what to do." Mara nodded. She set the phone on the nightstand, face down, and lay back against the pillows. Daniel did the same. They didn't speak again. They just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to each other breathe. Neither of them slept well for the rest of the night. The next morning, Mara called Evelyn at 7:30 a.m. Evelyn was already awake. She'd been up since 6, the way she always was, even on weekends, even on holidays. She'd made coffee, read the newspaper at the kitchen table, and was halfway through a crossword puzzle when her phone rang. She saw Mara's name on the screen and answered immediately. "Good morning. Evelyn, do you have a minute?" There was something in Mara's voice, a tightness, a controlled tension, that made Evelyn set down her pen and give the call her full attention. "Of course. What's wrong? Can I come over? I want to show you something." "I'll be here." Mara arrived 20 minutes later. She parked in Evelyn's driveway, walked up the front steps, and knocked twice. Evelyn opened the door before the second knock finished. "Come in." Mara stepped inside, shook the rain from her coat, and hung it on the rack by the door. She was wearing jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and white sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from not sleeping, not from working. Evelyn led her to the kitchen and gestured toward the table. "Sit." "Coffee?" "Yes, please." Evelyn poured 2 cups, added milk and sugar to one, and handed it to Mara. Then she sat down across from her and waited. Mara pulled out her phone and set it on the table between them. "Someone texted me at 2:11 this morning." She opened the message thread, or tried to. The number was blocked now, so the thread was gone. But she'd taken a screenshot before blocking it. She pulled up the screenshot and turned the phone toward Evelyn. Evelyn looked at the screen. She read the message once. "Did you approve the upload?" Then she looked at the timestamp. 2:11 a.m. "Did you respond?" "No." Daniel called the number back. It went to voicemail. "What number?" Mara turned the phone back around and read the number aloud. Evelyn pulled out her own phone and typed it into her notes app, exactly as Mara had said it. And then, Mara continued, "I checked my email. Someone tried to sign into my account at 1:58. She pulled up the security alert and showed it to Evelyn. Evelyn read the entire email slowly, her eyes moving line by line. She noted the timestamp, the IP address, the location on the map. Then she took her phone and photographed the screen, zooming in to make sure the text was legible. "Did you change your password?" "Immediately. And I enabled 2-factor. "Good." Evelyn set her phone down and looked at Mara. "Do you still use the church Wi-Fi?" "Sometimes. When I'm there for meetings." "Stop. You think this is related to the church?" "I think someone's testing boundaries. And I think we need to know who." Mara wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and stared into it like she was reading tea leaves. "Daniel thinks we should report it." "To who?" "I don't know." "The police?" Evelyn considered this. "Not yet. The police need evidence of a crime. Right now, all we have is a text and a login attempt. That's not enough. Then what do? We document. We watch. And we wait for the next piece." Mara looked up. "You think there'll be a next piece?" "I know there will." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the wall clock above the stove and the faint hiss of rain against the window. Finally, Evelyn spoke again. "Forward me those screenshots. Email them to me right now while you're sitting here." Mara did. She opened her email, attached the screenshots, and sent them to Evelyn's address. Evelyn's phone buzzed a moment later. She opened the email, saved the attachments, and filed them in a folder labeled Records. "What else has been happening?" Evelyn asked. "Besides the link and the text." Mara thought for a moment. "The live stream cut out last Sunday. Halfway through the sermon. Brent had to reset it." "Did he say why?" "No. Just said it was a software issue." "Anything else?" "Ruth mentioned something about the printer in the office." It was spitting out blank pages with weird file names. When? Wednesday, I think. Maybe Thursday. Evelyn made a note on the pad of paper beside her coffee mug. I need to talk to Ruth. Why? Because printers don't spit out files on their own. Someone sent them. Mara set down her mug and looked at Evelyn with an expression that was equal parts relief and exhaustion. Thank you. For what? For not telling me I'm paranoid. Evelyn reached across the table and put her hand over Mara's. You're not paranoid. You're paying attention. There's a difference. They finished their coffee in silence, and then Mara left. Evelyn watched from the window as the Honda backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. Then she turned back to the kitchen table, opened her notebook, and added 2 new entries. October 25. Mara received a text at 2:11 a.m. Did you approve the upload? Unknown number, 913 area code. Security alert. New login to Mara's email at 1:58 a.m. Windows device, North Kansas City, IP 721985412. Underneath that, she wrote, pattern emerging. Multiple access points. Overnight activity. Intentional. She closed the notebook, slid it back into the drawer, and stared out the window at the rain. Over the next 10 days, small things continued to fall out of place. On November 1st, the announcements ran in the wrong order again. The greeting came before the call to worship, and the offering was taken before the scripture reading. Pastor Elaine didn't comment on it. She simply adjusted on the fly, moving through the service with the practiced grace of someone who'd been doing this for 30 years. On November 3rd, the live stream cut out again. This time it happened during the children's message when Pastor Elaine was sitting on the steps with 4 kids gathered around her, talking about gratitude. The feed went black. Comments started appearing in the live stream chat. Hello? Is this working? I can't see anything. Brent, watching from the AV booth in the balcony, swore quietly and reset the encoder. The feed came back 2 minutes later, mid-sentence. On November 4th, Ruth found the printer in the church office spitting out blank pages again. She was alone in the office. It was a Wednesday afternoon, quiet, with no meetings scheduled and no one else in the building except the janitorial staff downstairs. She heard the printer start up in the corner, whirring and clicking, and looked over to see sheets of paper sliding into the tray, one after another. She walked over and picked up the top sheet. It was blank except for a file name printed in tiny gray text at the bottom, 110420241. 0217. Ruth frowned. She picked up the next sheet. Same thing. Another file name, all numbers, no words. She went to the computer, opened the print queue, and canceled the job. Then she gathered the blank pages, 7 in total, and carried them to the pastor's office. Pastor Elaine was at her desk, working on Sunday's sermon. She looked up when Ruth knocked on the open door. Yes! Ruth held up the pages. The printer's doing it again. Elaine took the pages and looked at them. What are these? I don't know. File names, I think. But no content. Did you check the queue? I canceled it. Elaine set the pages on her desk and pulled up the church's file server on her computer. She searched for the file names Ruth had brought her, but nothing came up. The files didn't exist, or they'd been deleted. I'll email Brent, Elaine said. See if he knows what's going on. Ruth nodded and left. Elaine drafted an email to Brent, attaching photos of the blank pages and asking if he could troubleshoot the printer issue. She sent it at 3:47 p.m. Brent responded at 4:12, probably a software handshake issue. I'll clear the queue remotely and check the driver settings. Should be fine, star. Elaine replied, thanks. Let me know if you need me to do anything on my end, star. Brent didn't respond. That evening, Ruth mentioned the printer issue to Evelyn during a phone call about the upcoming stewardship campaign. They were discussing pledge cards and mailing lists, and Ruth casually mentioned the blank pages. Oh, and the printer's acting up again. Spitting out blank sheets with file names on them. Evelyn, who had been half listening while she made dinner, stopped stirring the soup on the stove. What kind of file names? Just numbers. Like 110420224-0217. Something like that. Evelyn turned off the stove. Ruth, do you still have those pages? I gave them to Pastor Elaine. Can you get them? I guess. Why? Because I want to see them. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Ruth said, Evelyn, what's going on? I don't know yet. But I think someone's been accessing the church's systems without permission. You mean hacking? I mean accessing. There's a difference. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'll get the pages tomorrow and bring them to you. Thank you. They hung up. Evelyn stood in her kitchen, staring at the pot of soup on the stove, thinking. The next day, Ruth brought the pages to Evelyn's house during her lunch break. Evelyn spread them out on the kitchen table and studied them. 7 pages, all blank except for file names printed at the bottom in tiny gray text. 110420241-0217. 110420242-0219. 110420243-0221. 110420244-0223. 110420245-0224. 110420246-0226. 110420247-0228. Evelyn pulled out her phone and took a photo of each page. Then she looked at Ruth, who was standing in the doorway with her purse still on her shoulder and her car keys in her hand. Did Pastor Elaine email Brent about this? Yes. He said it was a software issue. Did he fix it? He said he would. But did he? Ruth shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. I haven't checked. Evelyn nodded slowly. Ruth, I need you to do something for me. And I need you to not ask questions. Ruth looked wary. What? The next time Brent's in the office, can you take a photo of his car? Just the license plate. Why? I told you not to ask questions. Ruth stared at her for a long moment. Then she said, fine. But Evelyn, if something's wrong, we need to tell someone. We will. When we have proof. Ruth left. Evelyn returned to the pages on the table and studied the file names again. They all started with the same 6 digits, 110422024. November 4th, 2024. The date the files were created. And the 4-digit strings at the end 0217, 0219, 0221 looked like timestamps. Military time. 2:17 am, 2:19 am, 2:21 am. Someone had created these files in the middle of the night. And then, somehow, they'd been sent to the church office printer the next day. Evelyn added all of this to her notebook, cross-referencing it with the earlier entries. The pattern was becoming clearer. Overnight activity. Unauthorized access. Files appearing without explanation. And at the center of it all, Brent Lyle. On Sunday, November 6th, a USB drive appeared on the choir loft railing. Evelyn noticed it during the offertory hymn. She'd gone upstairs to retrieve a program she'd left on a chair the week before. She liked to keep the programs in a binder at home, organized by date, so she could reference past sermons and announcements. The staircase to the balcony was narrow and steep, with a worn wooden handrail and steps that creaked under your weight. She reached the top and walked across the balcony toward the choir loft. The loft was rarely used anymore. The choir had disbanded 5 years ago when Beatrice Chin decided she was too old to manage both the organ and a group of vocalists. Now it was just storage space, folded chairs, music stands, boxes of old hymnals that no one had the heart to throw away. And there, on the railing between the loft and the main balcony, was a USB drive. It was small, maybe 2 inches long, black, with a strip of blue painter's tape across the top. Someone had written pageant music in block letters with a black Sharpie. Evelyn stopped. She didn't touch the drive. She stood 3 feet away and stared at it, her mind cataloging details, the placement, the tape, the handwriting, the fact that no one was supposed to be up here except Brent and maybe the pastor. She pulled out her phone and took 3 photos from different angles. Then she went back downstairs, returned to her pew, and waited. After the service, she found Ruth in the fellowship hall, standing near the coffee urn with a clipboard in her hand, checking off names on the volunteer schedule for December. Ruth, did Brent leave a USB drive in the choir loft? Ruth looked up. I don't know. Why? There's one up there. Blue tape. Says pageant music. He didn't mention it to me. Can you text him and ask? Ruth pulled out her phone and sent a text to the worship planning team group chat. Brent, did you leave a USB in the choir loft? The response came back 30 seconds later. Yep. That's mine. Forgot to grab it. Thanks, star. Ruth showed Evelyn the message. Evelyn read it, said nothing, and walked away. That evening, sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open and the notebook beside her, Evelyn added a new entry. November 6. USB drive in choir loft. Blue painter's tape. Handwritten label, pageant music. Brent confirmed it was his. Then she went back through her notes and found an earlier entry from October 23, when she'd seen Brent using blue painter's tape to label the faders on the mixing board in the AV booth. She pulled up the photos she'd taken of the USB drive and zoomed in on the handwriting. Block letters. Angular. Consistent with the kind of handwriting you'd see from someone who worked in IT and was used to labeling cables and equipment. She compared the handwriting to the handwriting on the note Ruth had shown her the previous day, the note with the file names printed at the bottom of the blank pages. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was close. Evelyn leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. Small things, she thought. But small things stack. The Saturday before the incident, Evelyn volunteered to help fold bulletins in the church office. It was something she did once a month, when Ruth needed an extra pair of hands. The process was simple. Print 400 copies of the 2-page bulletin, fold each one in half, stack them in boxes, and carry the boxes to the narthex for the ushers to distribute on Sunday morning. It was quiet work. Meditative, almost. The copier hummed. The paper smelled like toner and warmth. The office smelled like old carpet and Ruth's lavender hand lotion, which she kept in a pump bottle on her desk and used approximately every 20 minutes. They worked in companionable silence for the first half hour, folding and stacking, until Ruth paused and held up a small yellow sticky note. Do you know anything about a video rehearsal file? Evelyn looked up. What kind of file? Brent said he needed it for tomorrow's service. Leave me this. She handed the note to Evelyn. It was a URL, written in block letters with a ballpoint pen. https://cloud-sharenti/folders/5t8kp3rq. No context. No explanation. Just the link. Evelyn pulled out her phone and photographed the note. Did he say what it's for? Just said to make sure it's accessible before tomorrow. Evelyn handed the note back. I'll check with Daniel. Ruth nodded and went back to folding. A moment later, her desk phone rang. She set down the bulletin she was working on and stepped into the hallway to take the call. Evelyn was alone. She looked at the phone in her hand. The photo of the note was still on the screen. She opened her browser, typed the URL exactly as it appeared on the note, and pressed enter. The page loaded quickly. A simple cloud storage interface. A folder labeled Service Files, November 6, 2 items inside. The first was a PowerPoint file, NOV6_slides_finalps. The second was a video file. No name, just a string of numbers. 110420241-0217 MP4. Evelyn stared at the file name. She'd seen those numbers before. On the blank pages Ruth had brought her. The ones the printer had spit out with no explanation. She didn't click on the video. She didn't download it. Instead, she right-clicked on the file and selected Properties. A small window opened, showing the file's metadata. File size, 473 MB. Upload date, November 4, 2024, 1:57 am. Uploaded by stmatthewsnewsletter@domain.com. Evelyn took a screenshot. Then she backed out of the folder, cleared her browser history, and slipped her phone back into her pocket. Ruth returned a moment later, apologizing. Sorry. That was Pastor Elaine. She's running late. No problem, Evelyn said. She picked up another bulletin and folded it calmly, her hands steady, her face neutral. Inside, her mind was racing. That evening, Evelyn printed the screenshot. She printed the metadata details. She printed the timestamp and the account name. Then she slid all 3 pages into the manila envelope that already held her earlier notes, the dates, The HIM numbers, the text message, the security alert, the photos of the USB drive, and the images of the blank pages from the printer. On the outside of the envelope, she wrote in pencil, "Access log, unauthorized use." She filed the envelope in the bottom drawer of her desk, under a folder labeled House, Miscellaneous. It sat there between a stack of old tax returns and a warranty booklet for a dishwasher she no longer owned. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't a detective. But she'd worked in offices long enough to know that paper, when organized properly, was a kind of power. And she had a feeling she was going to need it. By Monday morning, November 7th, the day after the incident, Evelyn had a plan. She'd been thinking about the presentation software the church used. It was called Simplify Worship, a cloud-based program designed for small congregations who couldn't afford expensive AV systems. It was inexpensive, $99 a year, and easy to learn. Upload your slides, connect your projector, and everything synced automatically. The church had been using it for 3 years. But what most people didn't know, what Evelyn had learned by reading the fine print in the volunteer training manual Ruth had once shown her, was that Simplify Worship kept detailed logs of device activity. Every upload, every login, every device that accessed the account. All of it timestamped and tied to user IDs. Most people didn't know that because most people didn't read user agreements or training manuals. But Evelyn did. At 9:15 a.m., Evelyn called Simplify Worship's customer support line. The number was listed at the bottom of their website, beneath a section titled Need Help. A representative named Kevin answered after 2 rings. He sounded young, mid-20s, maybe, and slightly bored, the way people sound when they've answered the same questions 100 times. "Thanks for calling Simplify Worship. This is Kevin. How can I help you today?" Evelyn kept her voice steady and professional, the voice she'd used for 3 decades at reception desks, when she needed to sound like she belonged somewhere she maybe didn't. "Hi, Kevin. I'm calling from St. Matthew's Lutheran Church in Kansas City. We're having an issue with duplicate service files in our account, and I'm trying to figure out where they're coming from. Can you walk me through how to access the device history?" "Sure thing. Are you logged into the account right now?" "Not yet. I'm gathering information first." "Okay. So once you're logged in, you'll want to go to Settings. Then click on Usage. Then Device Log. That'll show you every device that's accessed your account in the past 90 days, timestamps, IP addresses, device IDs, the works." Evelyn wrote that down word for word in the notebook open in front of her. "And if a file was uploaded from a USB drive, will that show up?" "Yep. You'll see the source type. It'll say USB, Cloud Sync, or Direct Upload, depending on how the file got there." "Perfect. And can I filter by date?" "You can. There's a calendar drop-down in the top right. Click that, select your date range, and it'll narrow it down." "Thank you, Kevin. That's exactly what I needed." "No problem. Anything else I can help with?" "Not today. Thanks again." Evelyn hung up and looked at the notes she'd just written. Then she picked up her phone and texted Daniel, "Can I borrow your pageant login tonight?" His response came 30 seconds later. "Why?" "Need to check something." There was a longer pause. Then, *OK. Come by after dinner star. That evening, Daniel was on the front porch when Evelyn arrived, replacing a loose light fixture. The old one had been flickering for weeks, and Mara had finally put her foot down and told him to fix it or she'd call an electrician. Daniel had opted to fix it himself. Evelyn parked in the driveway and walked up the steps. Daniel was on a stepladder with a screwdriver, working by the light of his phone, which he'd propped on the porch railing. "Almost done," he said, not looking down. "Take your time." 5 minutes later, the new fixture was installed. Daniel flipped the switch and warm yellow light flooded the porch. He climbed down, folded the ladder, and followed Evelyn inside. Mara was at the dining room table, grading essays. Red pen in hand, a mug of chamomile tea at her elbow, reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up when Evelyn came in. "Hi. Hi, sweetheart." Evelyn sat down across from her and opened her laptop. "I need your pageant planning login." Mara set down her pen. "What for?" "To check the device log." "What's a device log?" "It shows who accessed the account, when they accessed it, and from where." Mara looked at Daniel, who had just come in from the kitchen with a glass of water. He nodded. Mara pulled a sticky note from the stack beside her essay pile and wrote down the username and password in her careful teacher handwriting. She slid it across the table to Evelyn. Evelyn logged into Simplify Worship, navigated to Settings, then Usage, then Device Log, exactly as Kevin had instructed. The list was long, dozens of entries stretching back 3 months. Most were expected: Mara's laptop, Daniel's phone, Ruth's desktop in the church office. But there, buried in the middle of the timeline, were 2 entries that made Evelyn's pulse slow and steady the way it always did when something important came into focus. November 6, 2024, 9:13 am. Device: USB storage, balcony workstation. Action: file added. November 6, 2024, 9:14 am. Device: USB storage, balcony workstation. Action: file renamed. Evelyn took a screenshot. Then she scrolled further back and found another entry. November 4, 2024, 1:57 am. Device: Windows desktop. IP address: 7219854112. Action: file uploaded. 110420241-0217 MP4. She took another screenshot. Then she pulled up the security alert email Mara had received on October 25th, the one that showed a new sign-in to her Gmail account at 1:58 a.m. The IP address matched: 72.198.54.12. Evelyn closed the laptop and looked at Mara, who had stopped grading and was watching her with a stillness that felt like waiting. Someone uploaded a file to the cloud at 1:57 a.m. on November 4th, Evelyn said, her voice calm and factual. 2 days later, on November 6th, someone connected a USB drive to the balcony workstation at 9:13 in the morning and added that file to the service presentation. 1 minute later, at 9:14, they renamed it. Who? Mara asked. The account used to upload the file at 1:57 was stmatthewsnewsletter@domain.com. Mara's face went pale. That's Brent's account. I know. What was the file? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. They all knew what the file was. They'd all seen it for 3 terrible seconds on a Sunday morning in front of 200 people. Daniel, who had been standing in the doorway listening, walked over to the table and sat down. His jaw was tight. His hands were folded in front of him, knuckles white. Can you prove it was him? He asked, his voice low and controlled. Not yet, Evelyn said. But I can align the timeline. She opened a new document on her laptop and began typing. She listed every piece of information she'd gathered over the past 3 weeks. October 23, hymn numbers incorrect. Announcements out of order. Pageant link changed to spam site. Brent called it a glitch. October 25, Mara received text at 2:11 am. Did you approve the upload? Unknown number. Security alert. New Gmail login at 1:58 a.m. from IP 72.198.54.12. November 4, blank pages printed in church office with file names 110420241, 0217, etc. File uploaded to cloud at 1:57 a.m. by stmatthewsnewsletter@domain.com. November 6, USB drive in choir loft, blue painter's tape, labeled Pageant Music, USB connected to the balcony workstation at 9:13 a.m. File renamed at 9:14 a.m. Underneath that, Evelyn added one more detail, a detail she'd almost forgotten until now, but which suddenly seemed crucial. On the morning of November 6th, before the service started, Brent had complained loudly in the narthex about a parking ticket. He'd waved it around, asking other volunteers if the city ever forgave tickets for ministry work. Evelyn had seen it. She'd been standing near the coat rack, and Brent had walked past her holding the ticket up like a trophy of injustice. The ticket was timestamped 9:07 a.m., which meant Brent had been in the area, with access to the building, 6 minutes before the USB was connected in the balcony workstation. Evelyn typed that into the document, saved it, and closed the laptop. Daniel looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and exhaustion. What are you going to do with that? I'm going to write a letter. To who? To the people who need to see it. Who's that? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She thought about the pastor, kind, overworked, trying to hold a fractured congregation together with limited resources and too many demands. She thought about the board, well-meaning, but inexperienced volunteers who'd signed up to approve budgets and plan stewardship campaigns, not to manage crises. She thought about the police, who would need warrants and probable cause and evidence that met standards Evelyn wasn't sure she could provide. And then she thought about the insurance company. The insurer, she said finally. I'm going to send this to the church's insurance company. Daniel frowned. Why them? Because institutions respond to liability, Evelyn said. The board might ignore this. The pastor might try to handle it quietly. The police might say there's not enough evidence. But an insurer. She tapped the laptop. An insurer sees a claim waiting to happen. And when they see a claim, they investigate. Fast. Mara leaned forward. You're saying if we report this to the insurance company, they'll force the church to act. I'm saying they'll open a case. They'll send an investigator. They'll review the logs. And once that happens, it stops being a church matter and starts being a legal one. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, do it. Evelyn nodded. She stood, closed her laptop, and tucked it under her arm. I'll draft the letter tonight. It'll go out on Monday. Do we need to do anything? Mara asked. No. Just stay quiet. Don't post anything. Don't talk to anyone at church about this except each other. If anyone asks what happened on Sunday, just say you're handling it privately and you don't want to discuss it. That's it. That's it. Let the system do what it's supposed to do. Evelyn left. Daniel and Mara sat at the dining table in silence, the stack of ungraded essays still sitting between them, the red pen abandoned, the chamomile tea gone cold. On Monday morning, November 7th, Evelyn woke at 5:30 a.m. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, the manila envelope, and a stack of blank printer paper. The house was dark and quiet. The streetlights outside cast long shadows across the floor. She opened a new document and began typing. The letter was one page, single-spaced, written in plain, factual language with no accusations and no emotion. It began with a simple statement. Asterisk to whom it may concern asterisk. Asterisk on November 6, 2024, during a Sunday morning worship service at St. Matthew's Lutheran Church, located at 7821 Wernal Road, Kansas City, Missouri, 64114. An unauthorized video file containing intimate, non-consensual imagery was displayed on the sanctuary projection screen for approximately 3 to 4 seconds. The incident occurred during the announcements portion of the service, at approximately 10:47 a.m., in the presence of approximately 200 congregants. This letter is to notify you of the incident and to provide preliminary evidence suggesting that the display was not accidental, but rather the result of deliberate, unauthorized access to the church's audiovisual systems. She paused, read what she'd written, and continued. Asterisk timeline of events leading to the incident asterisk. October 23, 2024, multiple irregularities observed during worship service, including incorrect hymn numbers on projection screen and malfunctioning web page link directing users to spam websites. Asterisk October 25, 2024, 2:11 a.m. Text message sent to congregant Mara Park from unknown number, 913-555-0147. Reading, did you approve the upload? Star. October 25, 2024, 1:58 a.m. Unauthorized login attempt to Mara Park's personal email account from IP address 721985412, located in North Kansas City, Missouri. November 4, 2024, 1:57 a.m. Video file 110420241-0217 MP4. Uploaded to Church's Simplify Worship Cloud account by user account stmatthewsnewsletter@domain.com. Asterisk November 6, 2024, 9:13 a.m. USB storage device connected to balcony workstation at St. Matthew's Lutheran Church. File added to Sunday service presentation star. November 6, 2024, 9:14 a.m. File renamed within presentation software. November 6, 2024, approximately 10:47 a.m. Video file displayed on sanctuary projection screen during worship service. Evelyn stopped and reread the timeline. Clean. Factual. Verifiable. No speculation. No accusations. Just dates, times, and actions. She continued. Asterisk the St. Matthew's newsletter at Domain.com account is managed by Brent Lyle, the church's volunteer audiovisual coordinator. Mr. Lyle has administrative access to the church's Simplify Worship account, the balcony workstation, and all AV equipment. On the morning of November 6, Mr. Lyle was present at the church building before the service began, as evidenced by a parking citation he received at 9:07 a.m., which he displayed to other volunteers star. Asterisk this matter presents potential violations of Missouri Revised Statute 573110, which prohibits the non-consensual dissemination of private sexual images. It also raises concerns regarding the church's volunteer policy, which requires background checks and prohibits unauthorized use of church technology star. Additionally, this incident creates significant liability exposure for St. Matthew's Lutheran Church and its insurer, as it involves non-consensual display of intimate imagery in a public setting, potential claims for emotional distress, and violations of congregant privacy. Asterisk attached to this letter are copies, not originals, of the following evidence asterisk. Screenshots of device access logs from Simplify Worship account. Screenshot of security alert email sent to Mara Park. Screenshot of text message sent to Mara Park. Photographs of USB storage device found in church balcony. Photographs of unauthorized print jobs in church office. Metadata from cloud-stored video file. Dated index of irregularities observed October 23, November 6. I am providing this information to facilitate your investigation and to ensure that appropriate steps are taken to protect congregants, address policy violations, and manage the church's liability exposure. Please contact me if you require additional information. Respectfully, Evelyn Park. She added her phone number and email address at the bottom, then read the entire letter 3 times, checking for errors, tightening language, removing any hint of emotion or accusation. When she was satisfied, she printed 3 copies. Then she gathered all the supporting documents, the screenshots, the photos, the metadata printouts, the handwritten timeline, and printed 3 copies of each. She created a simple index on a single sheet of paper. Evidence index. Asterisk 1. Simplify Worship device log, November 4th to 6th, showing USB connection and file activity star. Asterisk 2. Gmail security alert, October 25th, showing unauthorized login from IP721985412 star. Asterisk 3. Text message screenshot, October 25th, 2:11M star. Asterisk 4. Photographs of USB drive in choir loft, November 6 star. Asterisk 5. Photographs of unauthorized printer activity, November 4 star. Asterisk 6. Cloud file metadata showing upload by St. Matthew's newsletter at Domain.com star. Asterisk 7. Dated observations log, October 23rd, November 6 star. She printed 3 copies of the index. Then she assembled 3 identical packets. Each one consisted of the cover letter, the evidence index, all supporting documents organized in order, a clip binding everything together. She placed each packet in a 9x12 manila envelope. On the front of the first envelope, she wrote in block letters, Claims Department, Church Mutual Insurance Company, P.O. Box 357, Merrill, Y54452. On the second envelope, Office of the Bishop, Central States Synod, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, 1920 Jefferson Street, Kansas City, MO64108. On the third envelope, Helen Duarte, Board Chair, St. Matthew's Lutheran Church. Delivered to home address, obtained from church directory. She did not send a copy to Pastor Elaine Kerr. She liked the pastor. She didn't want her to be the first person to carry this burden. The pastor would find out soon enough, when the insurer called, when the bishop's office contacted her, when Helen Duarte convened an emergency board meeting. But Evelyn wouldn't make Elaine the first domino. At 9:45 a.m., Evelyn walked to the post office 3 blocks from her house. It was a small branch, just 2 windows and a self-service kiosk, housed in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a Vietnamese restaurant. The air inside smelled like cardboard and adhesive. She stood in line behind an elderly man mailing a birthday package and a young mother with a toddler strapped to her chest. When her turn came, she approached the window and set all 3 envelopes on the counter. "I need to send these certified mail with return receipts." The clerk, a middle-aged woman with bifocals and a name tag that said Brenda, weighed each envelope and calculated the postage. "That'll be $43.62. Evelyn paid in cash. Brenda printed 3 green tracking slips and handed them to Evelyn along with the receipts. "You'll get confirmation once they're delivered." "Thank you." Evelyn folded the tracking slips and receipts carefully into her wallet, walked out of the post office, and went home. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table. She opened the newspaper and worked on the crossword puzzle. And she waited. 2 days later, on Wednesday, November 9th, the phone rang. Daniel's number. Evelyn was in the middle of folding laundry when she saw the call come through. She set down the towel she was working on and answered. "Hello. Mom, someone from the insurance company just called me." Evelyn sat down on the edge of the couch. "What did they say?" "They're opening an investigation. They said they received a report about an incident at the church, and they need to gather information. They want to meet with me and Mara on Friday." "Did they say who filed the report?" "No. They just said they were notified by a concerned party." "What else did they say?" "They asked if we'd be willing to provide access to our email accounts and phone records." "I said we'd talk to them on Friday." "Good. Don't give them anything until you meet with them in person." "Should we get a lawyer?" Evelyn thought about this. "Not yet. But if they recommend it, do it." There was a long pause. Then Daniel said, his voice quieter, "Mom, did you do this?" "I sent them the facts." "You didn't tell me you were doing that." "You would have asked me not to." Another pause. Then, softer, "Thank you." Evelyn's throat tightened. She swallowed. "You're welcome." They talked for a few more minutes, logistics, timing, what Daniel should bring to the meeting, and then hung up. Evelyn returned to her laundry, folding towels and washcloths with the same steady rhythm she brought to everything. But inside, she felt something shift. The wheels were turning now. The system was engaging. It was out of her hands. By Thursday afternoon, the board had been notified. Helen Duarte, the board chair, received Evelyn's packet on Wednesday morning. She read it once, slowly, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while she absorbed what she was reading. Helen was 61 years old, a retired accountant who'd spent 37 years working for a regional CPA firm, preparing tax returns and auditing small businesses. She was methodical, detail-oriented, and allergic to ambiguity. When she saw the evidence index, the timeline, and the supporting documents, she knew immediately that this was not something the board could handle internally. She called an emergency meeting for Thursday evening at 7 p.m. All 9 board members attended, along with Pastor Elaine and Ruth Calder, who was there to take minutes. They met in the church library, a small room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a round table, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. Helen opened the meeting with a printed copy of Evelyn's letter in her hand. "I received this on Wednesday. It outlines a serious incident that occurred during our service on November 6th, and it provides evidence suggesting that a volunteer may have deliberately displayed inappropriate content on our projection system." She passed copies of the letter around the table. The room fell silent as people read. Tom Richter, a board member who worked in IT, was the first to speak. "This is bad." "Yes," Helen said. Linda Ortiz, a community college professor, looked up from the letter. "Do we know if this is accurate?" "The insurance company is already investigating," Helen said. "They contacted Daniel and Mara Park yesterday." "So it's confirmed?" The timeline is confirmed. The rest is under investigation. Pastor Elaine, who had been sitting quietly with her hands folded on the table, finally spoke. Has anyone talked to Brent? Not yet, Helen said. The insurer advised us not to contact him until their investigator has reviewed the evidence. Why? Because if we talk to him, he could delete files, erase logs, or destroy evidence. Legally, we need to preserve everything as it is. Tom leaned forward. So, what do? We place him on indefinite leave, effective immediately. We revoke all AV access. We lock down his accounts. And we cooperate fully with the investigation. Another board member, a man named Jim Foster, who worked as a high school principal, raised his hand. What about Daniel and Mara? Have we reached out to them? Not yet, Helen said. I plan to call them tomorrow. We should offer counseling, Pastor Elaine said. And we should make it clear that we're not protecting the institution at their expense. We're protecting them. Helen nodded. Agreed. I'll coordinate that with the insurer. They're opening a settlement reserve, which means they're preparing for a potential claim. We need to be proactive about care and support. What happened to Brent? Linda asked. That depends on what the investigation finds. If the evidence supports what's in this letter, the county prosecutor will likely file charges. The insurer will also likely recommend that we terminate his volunteer position and ban him from church property. Jim frowned. Can we do that without violating his rights? Yes, Helen said. He's a volunteer, not an employee. We're under no obligation to provide due process beyond what our policies require. And our policies say that volunteers can be removed for misconduct. The room fell silent again. Outside, a car pulled into the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across the window. Someone getting out of choir practice, probably. Finally, Tom spoke. So we're really doing this? Yes, Helen said. We're really doing this. She looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. This is going to be difficult. It's going to be public. People are going to have questions we can't answer because of legal advice. But we're going to do this the right way. We're going to follow policy, cooperate with investigators, and protect the people who were harmed. Are we clear? Everyone nodded. Ruth, who had been typing quietly in the corner, looked up. Do you want me to draft a notice for Brent? Helen thought for a moment, then shook her head. No. I'll call him myself. Tonight. The meeting adjourned at 8:43 p.m. Helen sat alone in the library for 10 more minutes, staring at the letter Evelyn had sent, thinking about the woman who'd written it, a woman she knew only in passing, someone who sat in the fourth pew and volunteered to fold bulletins and never made a fuss. A woman who'd just appended everything. Helen pulled out her phone and dialed Brent's number. He answered on the third ring. Hello. Brent, it's Helen Duarte. Oh. Hi, Helen. What's up? I need to let you know that you're being placed on indefinite leave from your AV duties, effective immediately. There was a long silence. Then, what? Why? An incident occurred on Sunday that's under investigation. Until that investigation is complete, all your access is being suspended. What incident? What are you talking about? I can't discuss specifics. You'll be contacted by an investigator in the next few days. This is insane. I haven't done anything wrong. Brent, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm following protocol. You're not allowed on church property until this is resolved. If you have personal belongings in the AV closet, let Ruth know and she'll arrange for you to retrieve them under supervision. Under supervision? Are you serious? Yes. This is bullshit, Helen. You're going to regret this. Helen's voice remained calm, steady, professional. I'm sorry you feel that way. But the decision is final. You'll be notified when the investigation is complete. She hung up. Her hands were shaking. On Friday, November 11th, the investigator arrived. His name was Mark Patel, and he worked for a firm called Integrity Risk Solutions, a third-party forensic company contracted by Church Mutual Insurance. He was 47 years old, with graying temples, rimless glasses, and the kind of quiet competence that came from 2 decades of investigating workplace harassment claims, embezzlement cases, and liability incidents. He wore a gray suit, carried a leather briefcase, and spoke in complete, Measured sentences that made every question sound like a natural extension of the previous one. He met with Daniel and Mara at 10 a.m. in a conference room at the church. Evelyn was not invited, but she waited in the parking lot anyway, sitting in her car with the engine off and a thermos of coffee in the cup holder. Inside, Mark shook hands with Daniel and Mara, set his briefcase on the table, and opened it to reveal a laptop, a yellow legal pad, and a voice recorder. "Do you mind if I record this conversation?" he asked. "It's standard procedure." Daniel looked at Mara. She nodded. "That's fine," Daniel said. Mark pressed record and stated the date, the time, the location, and the names of everyone present. Then he folded his hands on the table and looked at them with a calm, empathetic expression. "I know this is difficult," he said. "I want you to know that my goal here is not to interrogate you. It's to understand what happened, gather evidence, and make sure the church responds appropriately. You're not under investigation. You're the complainants." "Okay." Mara nodded. Daniel said, "Okay. Good. Let's start with the incident itself. Can you walk me through what you saw on November 6th? Daniel spoke first. He described the service, the announcements, the flicker on the screen. He described standing up, covering the projector lens, telling someone to turn it off. He described the silence that followed, the way Mara sat perfectly still, the way people avoided looking at them afterward. Mara added details. The video window. The recognition. The way her chest tightened and her vision narrowed. The way she didn't turn around because she didn't want anyone to see her face. Mark took notes. He didn't interrupt. He let them speak until they had nothing left to say. Then he asked, "When did you first notice that something was wrong?" "Before the incident, I mean." Mara looked at Daniel. He nodded, and she pulled out her phone. She showed Mark the screenshots she'd saved, the 2:11 a.m. text message, the 1:58 security alert, the string of small failures that had preceded the incident. Mark photographed each screen with his own phone, then made notes on his legal pad. "Did you report any of this to church leadership before November 6th? He asked. Daniel mentioned the spam link to Brent, Mara said. He said it was a glitch. "Did you report the text message or the email login?" "No. We didn't think it was connected." "When did you realize it was connected?" "After the incident. When Daniel's mother started putting the pieces together." Mark looked up. "Daniel's mother?" "Evelyn Park," Daniel said. "She's the one who documented everything." "Is she here?" "She's in the parking lot." Mark closed his notebook and stood. "I'd like to talk to her." 5 minutes later, Evelyn was sitting in the conference room, hands folded in her lap, answering questions in the same calm, factual tone she'd used to write the letter. Mark asked about the timeline. Evelyn walked him through it, step by step, referencing her notebook and the screenshots on her phone. She showed him the device logs, the metadata, the USB photos, the printer files. She explained how she'd gathered the information, how she'd verified the IP addresses, how she'd cross-referenced the timestamps. Mark took notes for 47 minutes straight. When she was done, he looked at her with an expression that was equal parts respect and mild disbelief. "Mrs. Park, have you ever worked in law enforcement?" "No. I was a receptionist." "You're very thorough." "I've had practice." Mark smiled, a small, professional smile that acknowledged competence without inviting familiarity. "This is excellent documentation. It's going to make my job much easier." "Good," Evelyn said. "What happens next?" "I'll verify the device logs with Simplify Worship directly. I'll pull the IP registration records for the address that accessed Mrs. Park's email. I'll request carrier information for the phone number that sent the text. And I'll compile everything into a report for the insurer and the church board." "How long will that take?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then the insurer will decide whether to file a claim, and the board will decide whether to involve law enforcement." "Will Brent be notified?" "Not by me. But once I start pulling records, he'll probably figure it out." Evelyn nodded. "One more question." "Yes. Will Daniel and Mara be safe? From retaliation, I mean." Mark's expression turned serious. "The insurer has already opened a settlement reserve, which means they're treating this as a potential claim." If Brent tries to contact them, harass them, or interfere with the investigation, that becomes witness tampering, and it escalates to criminal charges very quickly. So yes, they'll be safe. Evelyn stood. Thank you. She left the conference room, walked out to the parking lot, and drove home. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with a mug of tea and the envelope still filed in her desk drawer. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The facts were in motion now. The system was working. All she had to do was wait. Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation unfolded quietly. Mark Patel sent a formal request to Simplify Worship for a complete account audit, including device logs, IP addresses, and user activity reports. The company responded within 48 hours with a 19-page PDF showing every login, upload, and access event for the past 6 months. The logs confirmed everything Evelyn had documented. The USB connection at 9:13. The file was renamed at 9:14. The 157A.M upload from IP 72.198.54.12. Mark then sent a subpoena request to the IP address registrar, asking for the name and billing address associated with that IP. The registrar responded with Brent Lyle, 4412 Maple Street, North Kansas City, MO 64116. Mark sent a third request to the cellular carrier that owned the phone number that had texted Mara at 2:11 a.m. The carrier confirmed that the number was registered to Brent Lyle and had been active since 2019. By November 23rd, Mark had everything he needed. He compiled a 32-page report and submitted it to Church Mutual Insurance on November 25th, the day before Thanksgiving. The report concluded, based on device logs, IP address records, and carrier information, there is substantial evidence that Brent Lyle, volunteer AV coordinator at St. Matthew's Lutheran Church, deliberately uploaded a private video file to the church's presentation software on November 4, 2024, at 1:57 a.m. and subsequently displayed that file during worship services on November 6, 2024. The file was accessed from Mr. Lyle's home IP address and was later manipulated using a USB device connected to the church's balcony workstation at a time when Mr. Lyle was present on church property. Additionally, Mr. Lyle's phone number was used to send a text message to congregant Mara Park at 2:11 a.m. on October 25, 2024, suggesting advanced knowledge or intent related to the unauthorized upload. This incident constitutes a violation of Missouri Revised Statutes 573110, non-consensual dissemination of private sexual images, and presents significant civil liability for St. Matthew's Lutheran Church. Recommendations 1. Refer the matter to the Kansas City Police Department for criminal investigation. 2. Terminate Mr. Lyle's volunteer position and ban him from church property. 3. Notify congregants Daniel and Mara Park of their right to pursue civil claims. 4. Implement enhanced AV access controls and device auditing procedures. 5. Open settlement negotiations with the parks to resolve potential claims. On November 27th, the board met again. Helen Duarte read the report aloud, slowly, pausing occasionally to let the weight of the findings sink in. When she finished, the room was silent. Finally, Tom Richter spoke. So it's confirmed. Yes, Helen said. What do we do now? We follow the recommendations. We notified the police. We terminate Brent's volunteer status. We offer counseling and support to Daniel and Mara. And we settle. Linda Ortiz raised her hand. Do we have to make a public statement? The insurer recommends a brief statement acknowledging the incident without providing details. Something like, an incident occurred involving unauthorized use of church technology. An investigation was conducted. Policies have been updated. Support is available to those affected. That's it. That's it. Anything more specific creates legal risk. Pastor Elaine, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke. I'd like to visit Daniel and Mara personally. With your permission. You have it, Helen said. But coordinate with the insurer first. Make sure you're not saying anything that could interfere with a settlement. Elaine nodded. Jim Foster, the high school principal, leaned forward. What happened to Brent? Legally, I mean. The county prosecutor will review the case. If they file charges, it's likely to be a Class A misdemeanor, unlawful dissemination of intimate images. That carries up to a year in jail and a $5,000 fine. Will he go to jail? Probably not. First offense, no prior record. He'll likely get probation and counseling. That doesn't seem like enough. Helen looked at him evenly. It's not. But it's what the law allows. The meeting adjourned at 9:15 p.m. The next day, Helen called the Kansas City Police Department and filed a formal report. On December 2nd, a detective named Sarah Brennan contacted Daniel and Mara and asked them to come in for an interview. They went on December 4th, accompanied by an attorney the insurer had recommended, a woman named Patricia Coe who specialized in privacy law and victim advocacy. The interview lasted 2 hours. Detective Brennan was thorough, professional, and empathetic. She reviewed the device logs, the IP records, the carrier information, and the screenshots Mara had saved. She asked about the text message, the security alert, and the video itself. At the end of the interview, she said, "I have enough to present this to the prosecutor. I'll be in touch." On December 10th, the county prosecutor's office filed charges against Brent Lyle. 1 count, unlawful dissemination of intimate images without consent, Missouri Revised Statutes 573110, Class A misdemeanor. Brent retained an attorney, a defense lawyer named Robert Callahan, who specialized in tech crimes and civil liberties cases. Callahan immediately filed a motion to suppress the device logs, arguing that they'd been accessed without Brent's knowledge or consent. The motion was denied. On December 18th, Callahan negotiated a plea agreement. 6 months of supervised probation. Mandatory counseling. A $2,000 fine. No jail time. No public trial. The prosecutor accepted the deal. On December 20th, Brent appeared in court, entered his guilty plea, and was sentenced. He didn't speak. He didn't apologize. He signed the paperwork, paid the fine, and left. That same day, the insurer reached out to Daniel and Mara through Patricia Coe with a settlement offer. The terms were confidential, but the offer was substantial, enough to cover counseling, legal fees, and general damages. The agreement included a non-disclosure clause prohibiting Daniel and Mara from discussing the settlement amount or the church's internal processes, but it did not prevent them from speaking about their own experience. Patricia Coe reviewed the offer with them and recommended they accept. "This is fair," she said. "And it gives you closure." Mara looked at Daniel. He nodded. They signed on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. By late December, the formal consequences had taken shape, and the church had begun the quiet work of moving forward. On December 18th, the same day Brent's plea agreement was finalized, the board issued a statement during Sunday announcements. Helen Duarte read it herself, standing at the pulpit with a printed page in her hands and no inflection in her voice. The statement was 73 words long and had been reviewed by 3 different attorneys before it was approved. On November 6. An incident occurred involving the unauthorized use of church technology and the display of inappropriate content during a worship service. An external investigation was conducted by our insurance provider. Policies have been updated, and all audiovisual access is now restricted to named staff members only. Pastoral counseling and support resources are available to anyone affected by this incident. We take this matter seriously and are committed to maintaining a safe and respectful environment for all members of our congregation. That was it. No names. No details. No apology framed in the language of institutional liability. When Helen finished, she folded the paper, stepped down from the pulpit, and returned to her seat. The congregation sat in silence. No one clapped. No one whispered. They simply absorbed the information and moved on to the next hymn. Daniel and Mara were not there that Sunday. They decided, together, to take a break from St. Matthew's, not forever, but for now. They needed distance. They needed quiet. They needed time to figure out what it felt like to walk into a room without wondering if people were thinking about the thing they weren't saying. So they went to a small Episcopal church across town, St. James, a modest stone building with stained glass windows and wooden pews that creaked when you sat down. They sat in the back, listened to the service, and left before anyone could ask them questions. After a few weeks, they stopped going there too. Sunday mornings became something else: coffee at home, crossword puzzles at the kitchen table, long walks around the neighborhood while the city woke up around them. It wasn't a church, but it was theirs. Mark Patel's forensic report arrived at the insurer's office on December 21st. It was 32 pages long, and it confirmed everything Evelyn had documented in her letter. The USB injection at 9:13. The cloud file uploaded at 1:57 from Brent's home IP address. The file was renamed at 9:14. The phone number registered to Brent's carrier account. The security alert to Mara's email at 1:58. The correlation between the parking ticket timestamp and the device connection log. Every detail aligned. Every piece of evidence corroborated the next. The insurer's legal team reviewed the report and made 3 determinations. First, the church had significant exposure to civil liability under Missouri privacy statutes and common law claims for emotional distress. Second, the incident was preventable and resulted from inadequate oversight of volunteer access to sensitive systems. Third, settlement was the most cost-effective path forward. They authorized a settlement reserve of $75,000 and instructed the church's attorney to negotiate with Patricia Coe. The settlement was reached on December 23rd. The terms were confidential, but the agreement included provisions for counseling costs, legal fees, and general damages. It also required the church to implement new AV protocols, conduct annual audits of volunteer access, and provide mandatory training on digital safety and privacy. Daniel and Mara signed the agreement on December 23rd. They didn't celebrate. They didn't talk about it. They just signed the paperwork, gave it to Patricia Coe, and went home. That evening, they sat at their kitchen table with the lemon tree still on the windowsill, small, stubborn, and still alive. Mara had kept it going all winter, watering it carefully, rotating it toward the light, talking to it sometimes when Daniel wasn't home. Daniel looked at the tree and said, "It's still holding on." "Yeah," Mara said. "It is." They ate dinner quietly, pasta with marinara, garlic bread, a salad Mara had made that morning. Afterward, they washed the dishes together, moving around the kitchen with the easy rhythm of people who'd been doing this for 17 years. And when the dishes were done and the kitchen was clean, they sat on the couch and watched a movie, something light, something forgettable, something that didn't require them to think or feel or remember. Outside, the December wind rattled the windows. Inside, the house was warm. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was quiet. And for now, that was enough. On January 7th, Pastor Elaine Kerr visited Daniel and Mara at Evelyn's house. She didn't call ahead. She simply knocked on the door on a Tuesday afternoon when she knew Evelyn would be home and Daniel and Mara might stop by after work. Evelyn opened the door and found the pastor standing on the porch, holding a 3-ring binder and a small potted orchid. "Pastor." "Evelyn. I hope this isn't a bad time. Come in." Elaine stepped inside, shook the cold from her coat, and followed Evelyn into the living room. Daniel and Mara were already there. They'd come over for dinner and had been sitting at the kitchen table, grading papers and reviewing work schedules. When they saw the pastor, they both stood. "Pastor Elaine," Mara said, her voice cautious. "Mara." "Daniel. I hope it's okay that I came." They nodded, and the 4 of them sat down, Elaine on the couch, Daniel and Mara in the armchairs, Evelyn on the ottoman near the window. Elaine set the binder on the coffee table. It was labeled Revised AV and Technology Protocols. "I wanted to bring you this," she said, gesturing toward the binder. "And I wanted to say something in person." No one spoke. Elaine continued. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry that this happened. I'm sorry that I didn't catch it earlier. I'm sorry that you were harmed in a place that was supposed to be safe." Mara's jaw tightened. She didn't respond. Daniel looked at the binder, then back at Elaine. "What's in there?" "New policies. Device access logs. Background checks for anyone with admin privileges. Annual audits. Mandatory training. Everything the insurer recommended, plus a few things the board added. Will it prevent this from happening again? I don't know, Elaine said, and her honesty was startling in its simplicity. I hope so. But I can't promise that. What I can promise is that we're trying. We're learning. And we're not going to pretend this didn't happen. Mara spoke for the first time. Where's Brent? He's not allowed on church property. His plea agreement included a stay-away order. If he violates it, he goes to jail. Is he still in Kansas City? I don't know. I haven't heard from him. The room fell silent. Outside, a car drove past, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Finally, Evelyn spoke. Pastor, why did you come here? Elaine looked at her, then at Daniel and Mara. Because I wanted you to know that you're not forgotten. That the church hasn't moved on and left you behind. That if you decide to come back, whenever you're ready, you'll be safe. And if you decide not to come back, I understand. But I needed you to hear that from me. Mara's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. She just nodded once, sharply, and looked away. Daniel reached over and took her hand. Elaine stood. I'll leave the binder here. If you want to read it, it's yours. If not, that's fine too. She picked up the orchid and set it on the side table. This is for you. It doesn't fix anything. But I wanted you to have it. She left quietly, closing the door behind her. For a long time, no one moved. Then Mara stood, walked over to the orchid, and touched one of the white petals. It's pretty, she said. Yeah, Daniel said. It is. Evelyn didn't say anything. She just watched them, these two people she loved, standing together in her living room, still here, still holding on. By late January, the snow came twice and gave up. Kansas City winters were unpredictable, 1 week frigid and white, the next week gray and thawing. This year was no different. The snow fell on January 12th, covering the streets and sidewalks in a thin layer of white that melted by afternoon. It fell again on January 19th, heavier this time, sticking to the trees and rooftops and making the neighborhood look like a greeting card for about 6 hours before the plows came through and turned everything to brown slush. By January 20th, the snow was gone, and the city settled into the dull, gray stretch of late winter, too cold to be pleasant, too late to feel new, just a long, slow wait for spring. Evelyn kept her routines. She woke at 6. She made coffee. She read the newspaper at the kitchen table and worked the crossword puzzle until she got stuck. She walked 3 blocks to the library on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons and shelved returns for 2 hours each time. She cooked dinner most nights, simple meals, the kind that came together in one pot or one pan and didn't require much thought. Soup, pasta, roasted chicken with vegetables. The manila envelope was still in the bottom drawer of her desk, filed under House, Miscellaneous. She hadn't opened it since December. She didn't need to. The case was closed. The settlement was signed. The plea agreement was finalized. It was done. But she didn't throw it away. She couldn't. Not because she thought she'd need it again, but because it felt like something that should be kept, a record of what had happened, a reminder of what she'd done, proof that documentation mattered. So it stayed in the drawer, untouched, gathering dust. Mara started walking again in late January. She'd stopped after the incident, stopped her morning walks, stopped her podcasts, stopped the small rituals that had structured her days. For weeks, she'd gone straight from bed to the shower to the car to work, moving through the motions without thought or feeling. But in late January, she woke up one morning and decided she was tired of being tired. She put on her sneakers, her knit cap, her winter coat. She plugged in her earbuds and stepped outside. The air was cold and sharp, the kind of cold that made your lungs ache. She walked slowly at first, just around the block, her breath visible in the morning light. The neighborhood was quiet. Most people were still inside, drinking coffee, getting ready for work. She walked past the house with the faded Christmas lights still hanging from the gutters. Past the corner where the bus stop bench had a new coat of green paint. Past the diner where the Saturday breakfast crowd filled the windows with steam and the smell of bacon drifted into the street. She didn't think about the incident. She didn't think about Brent or the settlement or the policies that had been rewritten. She just walked. When she got home, Daniel was in the kitchen, making eggs. "You went for a walk," he said. "Yeah. How was it?" "Cold." He smiled. "Want eggs?" "Yeah." They ate breakfast together at the kitchen table. Eggs, toast, orange juice, and then Daniel left for work and Mara sat down to grade a stack of essays her sixth graders had written about their favorite books. It wasn't much, but it was something. By February, Daniel had started walking with her. He'd wake when she did, pull on his coat and shoes, and follow her out the door. They didn't talk much during the walks, just moved side by side through the neighborhood, their breath clouding the air, their footsteps synchronized. Sometimes they'd stop at the diner and get coffee to go. Sometimes they'd take a longer route and walk past the park where the geese gathered by the pond. Sometimes they'd just loop around the block twice and come home. It became a routine. Not a rule, not a requirement. Just something they did together. And slowly, across weeks and then months, the incident began to settle into the past. Not forgotten. Not erased. But contained. A thing that had happened, that had been addressed, that no longer defined the shape of their days. One Saturday in early March, Evelyn sat on her back porch with a glass of iced tea and a book she wasn't really reading. The afternoon was warm, unseasonably warm, the kind of day that made you think spring had arrived early and winter was finally over. The cicadas hadn't started yet, but the birds were loud, chirping and calling from the trees that lined the back fence. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mara, * the lemon tree bloomed. Come see it star. Evelyn smiled. She set the book down, grabbed her keys, and walked the 4 blocks to Daniel and Mara's house. When she arrived, they were both in the kitchen, standing in front of the windowsill where the lemon tree sat in its terracotta pot. It was small, maybe 18 inches tall, with dark green leaves and, nestled among the branches, 2 pale yellow blossoms. "Look at that," Evelyn said. Mara grinned. "I didn't think it would make it through winter. You kept it warm. I kept it alive." Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, smiling in that quiet way he had when he was proud of something, but didn't want to make a fuss. "Mom, you want to stay for dinner? What are you making?" "Pasta. Garlic bread. Salad." "I'll stay." They cooked together, moving around the kitchen with the easy rhythm of people who'd done this 100 times before. Mara chopped vegetables. Daniel boiled water and stirred sauce. Evelyn set the table and poured glasses of water from the pitcher in the fridge. They ate slowly, talking about nothing in particular, the heat, the weekend forecast, a movie Mara wanted to see. When dinner was over, they cleared the plates and stood at the sink together, washing and drying and stacking dishes in the cabinet. And as Evelyn dried the last plate and set it on the shelf, she looked at the lemon tree on the windowsill and thought about how small things, when cared for, eventually bloom. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't need to. By late summer, the case had become a footnote. The settlement was finalized. The criminal case was closed. The church's new protocols were in place, and the congregation had moved on to other concerns: the fall stewardship campaign, the search for a new youth director, the annual rummage sale that always caused more drama than it was worth. Evelyn still had the manila envelope in her desk drawer. She'd thought about throwing it away a few times, but something kept her from doing it. Not because she wanted to hold on to the past, but because she wanted to remember that documentation mattered. That facts, when gathered carefully and presented properly, could protect people. That power didn't always require a loud voice or a dramatic gesture. Sometimes it just required knowing which door to knock on and when. One evening in late August, she sat at her kitchen table and opened the envelope for the first time since January. She spread the contents across the table, the screenshots, the metadata printouts, the device logs, the photos of the USB drive, the index she'd written by hand on a single sheet of paper. She read through it all once, slowly, the way someone might read a letter from a friend they hadn't seen in years. She traced her finger along the timeline, remembering the nights she'd stayed up late documenting, the mornings she'd called support lines and asked careful questions, the afternoons she'd sat with Mara and Daniel and explained what the evidence meant. And then, carefully, she slid everything back into the envelope, sealed it, and returned it to the drawer. She didn't need it anymore. But she wasn't ready to let it go. The summer faded into autumn, and the light changed again, golden instead of white, slanting through the kitchen at a lower angle, casting longer shadows across the floor. Evelyn kept her routines. She volunteered at the library. She walked with Mara on Thursday mornings. She cooked Sunday dinners for Daniel and whoever else wanted to come. Sometimes it was just the three of them. Sometimes Ruth stopped by with a casserole and stayed for coffee. Sometimes Pastor Elaine sent a text asking if she could drop off a book she thought Evelyn might like. Life, Evelyn thought, had a way of filling in the gaps. On a Saturday in mid-October, nearly a year after the incident, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with the newspaper spread in front of her and a mug of tea cooling at her elbow. The house was quiet. The cicadas were gone. The trees outside had started to turn gold and orange and deep red, the colors of a fire just starting to burn. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel, *, we're going back to St. Matthew's tomorrow. Just wanted you to know, star. Evelyn read the message twice, then set the phone down and stared at the wall for a long time. She didn't know what to feel. Relief, maybe. Pride. Worry. All of it at once. Finally, after several minutes, she picked up the phone and typed a reply, "I'll be there." The next morning, Evelyn woke early, dressed carefully, and drove to St. Matthew's. She parked in the same spot she always had, third row, left side, under the oak tree that dropped acorns on the hood in late September. She walked across the parking lot slowly, her hands in her coat pockets, her breath visible in the cool October air. Inside, the sanctuary looked exactly the same. The lemon oil smell. The worn carpet. The fourth pew, left aisle, end seat. She took her place and waited. Daniel and Mara arrived a few minutes later. They sat 2 rows ahead, the way they always used to. Daniel was ushering again. He'd started back the week before, just to see how it felt. He moved through the sanctuary with the same calm efficiency he'd always had, handing out bulletins, greeting people, smiling his steady, untroubled smile. Mara sat beside an older woman Evelyn didn't recognize, and they spoke quietly before the service started. The screen behind the pulpit flickered on, showing the opening hymn. Evelyn watched it carefully, her shoulders tense, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Nothing went wrong. The service began. The hymn numbers were correct. The announcements ran in order. The projection worked smoothly, and no one in the AV booth, Tyler now, not Brent, made a mistake. Pastor Elaine stood at the pulpit and delivered a sermon about renewal, about how communities heal not by forgetting what happened, but by making space for new growth. She didn't mention the incident. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew what she was talking about. When the service ended, people stood and gathered their coats and moved toward the exits in small clusters. Daniel and Mara didn't linger. They walked out together, holding hands, and Evelyn followed at a distance. In the parking lot, Daniel turned and saw her. He smiled, a small, tired smile, and walked over. "Thanks for coming. I said I would." "I know. But still." Mara joined them, and the three of them stood together in the cold morning light, not saying much, just being there. Finally, Daniel spoke. "We're not staying long. Just testing the waters." "That's fine," Evelyn said. "Take your time. Are you coming back next week?" "If you are." He nodded. "We are. So am I." They said goodbye, and Evelyn watched them walk to their car, climb in, and drive away. Then she walked to her own car, sat behind the wheel, and let herself breathe. The manila envelope was still in her desk drawer at home. The case was still closed. The settlement was still final. But this moment, standing in the parking lot with her son and daughter-in-law, watching them choose to come back, this felt like the real ending. Not a triumph. Not a victory. Just a quiet return to ordinary life, where people made mistakes and tried to fix them, where institutions failed and then tried to do better, where harm was named and addressed and, eventually, if you were lucky, healed. Evelyn started the car, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove home. The October sun was bright and low, cutting through the windshield at an angle that made her squint. She turned on the radio. A folk song played, something about rivers and roads and finding your way back. She listened and she drove, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from winning. The kind that comes from knowing you did what you were supposed to do, when you were supposed to do it, and that the people you loved were still here, still walking, still blooming. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the song had ended, and the house was waiting. She went inside, made lunch, and sat at the kitchen table with a book. The light came through the window at 2 p.m., just like it always did, and laid a pale square on the wood. She let it sit there, warming the surface, until it faded and the room went cool again. And then she got up, closed the book, and went about her day. Because that's what you do when the crisis is over and the case is closed and the world keeps turning. You keep living. You keep showing up. You keep the envelope in the drawer, just in case. And you let the light move across the table, day after day, until the seasons change and the trees bloom and the next chapter begins. Evelyn Park, 56 years old, mother, widow, and keeper of order, sat at her kitchen table on a Thursday afternoon in late November, 1 full year after the incident, and looked at the calendar on the wall. November 6. The anniversary. She didn't mark it. She didn't mention it to anyone. She simply noted it, the way she noted all significant dates, and then she moved on. Because the story wasn't about the date. It wasn't about the video, or the investigation, or the settlement, or the policies that had been rewritten in the aftermath. The story was about what happened next. About Daniel and Mara, who kept walking and kept blooming. About Ruth, who kept the office running and kept the files in order. About Pastor Elaine, who kept preaching and kept learning. About the congregation, which kept gathering and kept trying. And about Evelyn, who kept the manila envelope in the drawer and the lemon tree on the windowsill and the light moving across the table, year after year, until the memory of the incident became just another part of the long, complicated history of a life lived carefully and quietly and well. That evening, Evelyn made tea, turned on the lamp, and opened a new book. Outside, the November wind picked up, rattling the branches and carrying the first cold edge of winter. Inside, the house was warm. The phone didn't ring. The world stayed still. And in the bottom drawer of the desk, under a stack of old tax returns and a folder labeled House, Miscellaneous, the manila envelope sat undisturbed, its contents intact, its purpose fulfilled. A record of what had been. A reminder of what mattered. And proof, if proof were ever needed, that paper kept in order is a kind of power all its own. Evelyn finished her tea, closed the book, and climbed the stairs to bed. The house settled around her, creaks and sighs, and the hum of the furnace kicking on in the basement. She pulled the quilt up to her shoulders, closed her eyes, and let herself rest. Tomorrow, she would wake early and make coffee and walk with Mara. Tomorrow, Daniel would stop by after work and fix the loose handle on the pantry door. Tomorrow, the light would come through the kitchen window at 2 p.m. and lay a pale square on the table, and she would let it sit there until it faded. Tomorrow, life will continue. But tonight, in the quiet dark of her bedroom, Evelyn Park allowed herself a single, private thought. She had done what needed to be done. And it had been enough. The wind rattled the window one last time, and then the house fell silent. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded low and mournful and fading. And Evelyn, keeper of lists and maker of order, slept. Every story here will stir your soul. Welcome to Spice and Sugar, your daily escape into real emotions, bold lives, and unforgettable lessons. Here, it's all about love, loss, laughter, and the quiet strength that carries us through. I share stories that make you feel, that remind you you're not alone, that every bitter moment can lead to something sweet. If you want to laugh, cry, and see life through stories that heal and inspire, subscribe and stay a while.